Matt.
Hello.
Oh, good. My audio is coming out of the wrong place. That's very weird.
Hmm.
Audio, playback, MacBook, playback, Plantronic. Oh, now it's good. Hello, hello.
Good to go.
No, it's still out of the wrong.
Hmm.
All right. Hello, hello.
Hello.
Unbelievable. Yeah, it switches for a second, but then it comes out of my main. Oh man. How does my audio sound?
Great. Sounds good.
Um, about now, does it sound any different?
That I think sounds a little worse. It's a little more,
Sounds worse.
yeah, poppy and
Okay, so it sounds like weirdly I'm getting audio from my microphone, but I'm getting sound from my speakers. Okay, weird. Okay, let's see if it's, now it seems to have switched.
wait, hold on. I need to.
Where is Kaliya? your host, Mike Schwartz, founder of Blue, and this is a new bi-weekly live stream where you can meet identity gurus, comment on the conversation, and ask questions. This week, in our inaugural episode, I'm honored to introduce IdentityWoman Kaliya Young and Matt Vogel, founder of Center Identity. Matt, before we start, can you say a few words about what you do and your connection to digital identity?
Yeah, so we're working on new ways to authenticate using secret locations with Center Identity. And then I also found a blockchain project called Yada, and it focuses on not using universally unique identifiers for users.
Okay. And Kaliya, before we dive into the topic at hand, can you give us a quick intro about your journey in the digital identity space and what brought you here today?
Sure. I got it started through an unusual path. I met some technologists who were inspired to make the world a better place in the turn of the millennium, and they wrote a paper called The Augmented Social Network, Building Identity and Trust into the Next Generation Internet. And I thought their vision was fantastic. They talked about the need for user-centric digital identity and open standards to make that real, to support this new thing that was going to come called social networks. And I found the vision very compelling and knew it would make a big difference if we got it right. And I've been working on how we get it right ever since. I co-founded the Internet Identity Workshop in 2005 and continue to host that every 6 months and have a boutique consultancy focused on decentralized identity technologies.
Yes, and Matt and I both attend IIW, and I'd just like to make a quick note that the next IIW is happening on April 16th, I guess in about 2 weeks or so. And anyone interested in attending, I believe, is at internetidentityworkshop.com. Maybe, Kaliya, you could say a couple of words about that just because it's timely.
Yeah, so IIW is in California at the Computer History Museum, and we really create a space for the community working on these technologies to come together. We co-create the agenda every morning at the event. So if you are just hearing about this now and you're like, I've got a thing, great, come and share it with us there. It's a great opportunity to learn and share and move the whole industry forward. That's what we do there.
Okay, well, the topic at hand is Aadhaar versus the U.S. Social Security number. And this is a really deep topic. And you wrote a fantastic article, I guess we could call it an article, sort of comparing and contrasting Aadhaar with the U.S. Social Security as a system, as a digital identity system or a numbering scheme, I guess.
Yes.
And your article posits that the design of Aadhaar was to use citizen numbers like IP addresses in a digital network. How is that different from the Social Security numbers in the U.S.?
Well, I mean, part of it has to do with the technologies that were used to create these numbers. So the U.S. Social Security number system was created in 1935 with the leading technology at the time, which was punch card systems. So every record in the database has had a punch card, which they were a staple in my house. We had them growing up. They're sort of like left over from the machines, but people today don't know what they are. They're about this size, and basically when holes were poked into the card, it stored information like a name and a number. And so the technology and the circulated and moved around using the mail system. And defined as an indexical number. It was rhythm running. Really designed, that was just its initial purpose and design. And Aadhaar was your Aadhaar number to do everything in all aspects of your life. You would use it to log into commercial systems. You would use it to log into all different government departments for all purposes. And in some ways replacing a commercial IDP, an identity provider, like many of us, I don't, but many people use login with Google lots of places. But it would be like mandated use of your government issued digital ID to log in everywhere was kind of the vision that some of the people making that system had.
And so in the 50s, in your article, you mentioned that many government agencies would actually use the SSN as an identifier from this as for citizens, but that there was pushback in the US in the 60s and 70s against that practice. Why was there pushback in the first place?
There was pushback. Well, I think there's pushback in several different directions. One was just about digitization, and weird things started to happen to people. So there was the increased use of mainframe databases to run businesses. There was a consolidation of information, like data brokers are not new. They've existed since the 1800s, and credit scoring systems started in the 1800s, right? But they weren't digitized. And in the 50s, all those systems started to be digitized, and then companies started to profile people in databases, and then other companies were like, who should I send my catalog to? So people started to get catalogs in the mail for companies they never asked for a catalog from, and they're like, how is this happening? This is creepy in the time. Like now we might think nothing of it, but there was that. And then there was also this sort of awareness that as more government agencies started to have relationships with citizens using this indexical number, there was the same indexical number across all these agencies. You could start profiling people. And there was real and serious proposals by some in the US government to build a supranational database with all the records of all the people of all the agencies in one place to compete against the Soviet Union and build a better society, because we had a giant national data bank of all the data. And this proposal freaked people out, quite rightly. And there was many different hearings for different agencies and presidential commissions that investigated these ideas. And basically they came to good conclusions as a healthy functioning democracy to really choose to limit the use of social security numbers and regulate them more strongly. And out of all of that came the basis of sort of contemporary fair information practices and principles.
So let's say I'm a government agency and I can't use the social security number anymore. How do I know the identity of the person? Like, what does a person show to prove their identity?
Well, first of all, your social security number, this is another key difference between the U.S. social security number system and Aadhaar. There's no what we in the identity business call subject holder binding. So in Aadhaar, they collect your 10 fingerprints, 2 iris scans, and a photograph, which is 13 biometrics, and then they issue you a number. In the United States, the way you get a social security number today is you get born, your parents fill out the paperwork to get a birth certificate, with the county, and the county also simultaneously sends that information into the federal government, and it, with the name on the birth certificate, issues a number to that child. There's no subject holder binding, so the government doesn't know who, like, doesn't have any biometric registered of who got that number other than the name.
And so, but I see if the Aadhaar number or Social Security, let's say the identifier, is sort of like the primary key that enables me to correlate records. And previously, let's say I'm the Department of Education and I was using Social Security numbers. But now I'm told I can't use those Social Security numbers. Does that mean that the citizen would have a different number? I'd have an education number and a passport number and a Social Security number and all these different numbers. So what does it mean for the person if there's no central identifier that can be used across all government interactions?
Yeah, this is a good question. I think we need serious research. Like, these aren't easy questions to answer. We need research on how to solve them, right? How do you have usability? How do these institutions have memory? Right? The reason we have an indexical number, or why this was an innovation to have an indexical number to track lifetime contributions to a pension plan, was so that when you paid into that pension plan, your Social Security payment with each paycheck, that at the end of your life, they would know how much you contributed and how much you would get every month at the end of your life, right? So it made sense to track a human who might change their name, might move locations, might have all sorts of things moved, to create an indexical number. So indexical numbers are an important feature of sort of large administrative systems and computer databases. How those get applied to people in ways that are respectful of human dignity and respectful of not merging all data about a person together in one giant database the government can see all about you, is a great, like, it's not like there isn't an obvious answer. If we had it, we would be doing it right now. Like, I think there's promising sort of potential paths, and some of them Aadhaar has done. Like, one is this: you have a core indexical number, your Aadhaar number, and you can create virtual IDs that are 16 digits long and that are random, and that you can use to prove, basically take a second sort of name number pair with yourself, and the Aadhaar system knows it's you, but the agency isn't linking it back to that core Aadhaar number. So you can do biometric authentication, prove you are you, but not reveal your actual Aadhaar number.
One question I had, if I could jump in, they do, the baby feet print when you're born. Is that tied into the Social Security system? Are they using that in any way?
Who is they, by the way?
The government.
No, the government isn't taking people's babies.
Yeah, sure they are. Yeah, I had mine taken, so I was wondering. No?
It's in my baby book.
Yeah, it's like...
that doesn't mean the government is getting it.
That's a thing. Okay.
No.
Yeah. So I don't know. Did you get a chance to watch the video that I posted in the show? Did you know that every episode has a wiki page? In that wiki page, I'm putting homework, and one of the homework assignments I put in there was this video from that sort of gave. It was an India presentation about the benefits of their enterprise architecture, and from their perspective, Aadhaar is pretty successful. They point to billions of dollars of fraud avoided. And also, they say that from a citizen perspective, it promotes sort of ease of life. And from a business perspective, it enables ease of business. And so, what is the alternative? I mean, is the alternative to do nothing, or is the alternative to delay? And is the cost of that delay outweigh the benefits that India is getting right now from the Aadhaar system, which they say are significant?
So I think there's really, we need to separate out the problems. And I think one of the challenges in identity is because different aspects are so closely aligned, they're sort of seen as one thing. So let me just articulate what I mean specifically. Having a list of citizens with associated biometrics is something basically all Western democracies have. It works slightly differently in different places, but 87% of Americans have a government-issued photo ID, right? That's something that makes our society go. And we use that government-issued photo ID in physical form to do all kinds of transactions. And having that trust anchor from the government of like, this person is this person, and if something goes wrong, I know who the counterparty is in this transaction, and I might be able to hold them accountable, is an important function of these systems. But that register of who a citizen is a different challenge it's different than ongoing phone home authentication systems that are digital. And in India, those things are the same. The database of who people are and these phone home authentication systems, so the government sees everywhere you use your digital ID, that's where the problem is, not in do they have a coherent list of who their citizens are.
So there are, what I'm hearing is that citizens are concerned about the correlation of their data between government agencies. So there are solutions that exist, and one of them is mine, where you have these identities that can be, from a user-centric perspective, they're managing one key, or whatever you want to call it. They're managing one identity, but to all of the different respective agencies, they are different individuals. So like cryptographically, they're different. They're not correlatable between agencies. The technology is already in existence. Why do you think that it's not being adopted when I think it's been around for quite some time now?
Right. Right. So I think like part of what those of us who are worried about abuses of these systems need to focus on is not saying, no, the government can't register who its citizen is. It's like, after you've done that, how does your system work in ways that are empowering and not building a de facto surveillance state in the underlying architecture?
Yeah, and the fact is that it's not just the government agencies that can correlate you, but potentially the third parties, the banks, the telcos, your dating website, anyone who is using this identifier can, well, I guess the government can correlate you because they know all the third parties, but it's not just government agencies.
Right. So there's another problem, right? There's like a phone home architecture problem, which in the architecture itself, it's creating tracking for whoever is running that home base, right? And you also have anyone you share information with can correlate you by coordination, right? And this isn't solved by it's a little bit solved by saying you can't use the one number everywhere. But as soon as you share your name, if it's particularly unique, or your name and your birth date and maybe one other attribute about yourself, you're totally correlatable. So it must be solved ultimately by regulations like GDPR that say sharing data without consent isn't allowed. That's how you stop correlation at scale across an economy. It's not by just like saying you can't use one number, because there's many other factors that make you correlatable, not just a national ID number.
One of the nuances that your article highlighted was the fact that actually there is some transparency and regulation in the use of SSNs in the US. And I think people are quick to dismiss privacy in the US because we struggle with the experience of the world who are collecting and correlating all our data. So if you have, but at the same time, we take for granted a lot of the protections and oversight and transparency in the US government, and it's just assumed that it's either not there or forgotten about. But can you talk about maybe some of the oversight issues that would make, or what could Aadhaar do to improve the oversight and transparency of the system civilly?
Sure. Well, I mean, for starters, the institution that issues Aadhaar numbers, the UIDAI, is its own regulator. So this is a problem if you want to have that agency be accountable. It's accountable to itself. So it's
never good. Yeah.
Not great. I think in terms of things that I highlighted in the article that exist in the US are privacy impact statements, and also a requirement that all government agencies, when they start a new database that contains data about citizens, must disclose that in the Federal Register and also share the privacy impact assessment. So as much as we can sort of look at an agency, perhaps like the Department of Homeland Security, and have concerns about how much information it has about, the people that it is tasked to worry about and care about and interact with, there is transparency in exist, what information is in them, and before they're allowed to start those databases, they have to do a privacy impact assessment. So there's some sort of self-reflective in transparency, self-reflective kind of norms that are in the US government that are not necessarily thought, like they're not obvious on the outside. It's also one of these, in terms of people looking at, people around the world admire the United States, Western European democracies, and are like, we want to be like them. But I think they misunderstand some of the core things that make our systems work the way they do. And those laws that are in place are not highlighted or obvious to countries that are looking up to us to imagine how we manage the risks that something like a social security number presents.
And you mentioned that there's a culture around the use of the social security number in the US. It's not just laws and technology, but if you ask the average American for their social security number, they're going to ask you why. And they, so they might give it to you if you're filling out a credit card application or something. They might decide to give it to you, but there's a cultural expectation that any business or third party asking for your social security number, you need to do a little diligence and understand a little bit more about them. Yes. So I'm wondering, it sounds like, so given that culture, surely when the Indian government looked at rolling out a number like the social security number, given the challenges in the US around it, surely they did an extensive privacy impact assessment of what is this number we're going to issue to 1 billion people going to do? And they got, I'm hoping that they got a lot of feedback and made that all possible. Is that the case?
No, not at all. They were driven by techno-utopianists who had a vision of how to biometrically enroll people and to issue numbers based on biometric uniqueness. So if you were already enrolled, you couldn't get a second number. And they had a vision of how it would be used in society that didn't have any input from, like, it wasn't a national conversation. It was just done. And in fact, the UADII had no legal standing in the laws for 6 years of its existence. It operated outside of the law.
Well, just to play devil's advocate, I know that you're in San Francisco, the Bay Area, so it seems a little rich to sort of maybe be critical of startup culture, pervasive startup culture, or techno-utopia. Is it understandable that, or even a bad thing that maybe they applied startup culture to this really critical piece of their infrastructure?
So, yeah, when you put it that way, I think actually what they did was incredible, given certain cultural norms and constraints within India, and that their approach was successful. They focused on the minimum viable enrollment procedure, amount of information collected from citizens or residents, and devised a system that actually scaled. It's incredible what they did. So, both things are true at the same time, Mike.
Okay.
We can admire their capacity to have delivered a product at scale in a country like India, and at the same time it was done outside of any legal mandate or structure to do so.
Mm-hmm. Did they, what do you suppose stopped them, given the lack of regulation, stop them from implementing more, I guess, draconian measures like a social credit system or things like that? What do you think the differences are there between that and, say, China, who have implemented things like that?
Well, so, I mean, I was, it's hard to believe it was 5 years ago. I was in India. I think I came away with what I learned. I'm somewhat neutral on Aadhaar, both admiring what it did achieve and hopeful that it could be adapted in ways that are in alignment with democratic values. I think this is one of the all things to remember too, is India and the United States are the largest democracies on earth. So how governments interact with citizens and how that's done in a way that's respectful of democratic values is something both countries need to grapple with on their own terms and potentially share information about how they do that. I was worried, and I still have this worry, that if the trajectory of Aadhaar went in a certain path, that you would end up with a very easy like state surveillance and social credit possibility. And it's really up to India as a democracy to ask itself how it wants the systems to evolve and what those architectures and systems look like in a democracy.
So I just want to take a quick break here for a moment and invite the audience to post any questions in the chat. Barring any questions, we're going to go ahead for the next 15 minutes or so, because I think we could continue to talk about this.
Yeah.
Actually, so some of the applications that you mentioned, Matt, are being built on top of Aadhaar. So when I watch, and by the way, so for each show we have a wiki page which has the links to some of the background materials. one of the background material I posted was a video from India promoting Aadhaar, and two of the use cases that it mentioned were education and healthcare, but also payments to payment systems, so the social payments to citizens. So there's actually, it's not just Aadhaar, but there's almost an ecosystem around Aadhaar of third parties building systems around this data. Like, how do you get healthcare, or how do you apply for to be, admission to a university? Kaliya, can you talk a little bit more about sort of the opportunity and risks of some of these apps that are building around this system?
Sure. I don't have detailed familiarity, so we'll stick with the abstract. I think I also want to go back to like what's normal in the West. When I applied to university, I certainly put down my social security number. I know that my college that I teach at is fighting student fraud, meaning fake students registering, filling out government forms, getting money to go to school, and never coming to class. So there is a real need for certain institutions to figure out, like, is the person a real person? Now, solving that problem, as I noted in my paper, is a different, that's how we use, when I go and apply to school or to get a student loan or to go and be employed, I do share my name and my government ID, and those institutions can go and check databases to see if I'm actually a person or not. That is different than an ongoing use of the number for everything you do. So and this was done in some states in India where you would to prove your attendance at work, you would type in your Aadhaar number, biometrically authenticate every morning on your way into and then your way out of work. So these are both involve telling the institution your number, but one is using the authentication system every day and sharing a lot of information. The other is just figuring out, like, are you a person with this name? And we need to just pull these are two quite different use cases and not merge them into one use case.
Our first question from an audience member in IOH history, David Keltz, also an IAW alum, asks, now pervasive is the usage of Aadhaar in commercial and business contexts, or no, how pervasive is the usage? And what efforts were successful that helped create an ecosystem of usage? For example, so we've mentioned it's pervasive. Maybe you can give some more context on exactly how pervasive. And did they make people adopt it? Or did people say, hey, this is great, we want this?
So there's a culture of identity document sharing. So that's really different that I witnessed, to do all sorts of things. Check into a hotel, like people would, and I had this happen to my passport a lot. It got photocopied, because I didn't obviously have an Aadhaar card. So your passport will do, ma'am, thank you. And it would get photocopied and then sit in a pile of all the photocopies that had been done. So people's Aadhaar number cards are getting photocopied a lot. Now, could you imagine in the United States people just showing up and having their social security number card photocopied a lot? No. So this also goes to these cultural practices that go with these numbers and cards. I mean, I think people are trying to manage counterparty risk. If I've never met you before and you and I want to do business, how do I know who you are? We have to solve that problem. That's also why I think I work on verifiable credentials, because it helps solve that problem without the phone home system. But we're not having a conversation about that. We're comparing and contrasting these two national ID. systems.
In a way, the United States would be like level one because it's an identifier system without an authentication system, and Aadhaar is a centralized authentication system. And in the EU, we're seeing that they're building an infrastructure to move to wallets and decentralized identity where you're presented, you're issued a credential by the government and you present it without the government knowing who you present it to.
Yes.
Do you think that it was feasible? So this system is still this is still very new technology. Was it feasible for India to wait for this type of decentralized system? And would you have advocated for waiting for better technology, or before you implemented a federated identity system?
So I think that, looking, history is 2020. Hindsight's, 2020, right?
Yeah, hindsight 2020. Yes.
Well, I think when they were planning this system and getting it started in 2008, 2009, 2010, the architecture they picked was the only game in town. There wasn't another architecture. It wasn't even a twinkle in our eyes. You wouldn't have found it on the IIW board. So, and back to this thing, figuring out who your citizens are is something every Western liberal democracy does. So that is what Aadhaar did, and I think what it is good at. That is different than should it be used as an everyday login with Google-like thing for the government. No, right? It could be, and then you end up in a Chinese social credit universe, right? But that's up to, back again, India's a democracy. It needs to figure it out for itself. It's not up to us. We can just comment on it and share good information about how the SSN system in the US actually works, and not a projection of what they imagine it to be.
The reason I think this is actually more of an active topic, like you say, well, yes, certainly India is going to make its own decisions, of course, but India is also sort of exporting Aadhaar as a template for architecture for other developing nations. And so I think it becomes more than we're going to do our own thing, and we have every right to do that, to we're advocating for this thing that we built, but maybe it doesn't have some of the safeguards of the things that we even modeled it on. So maybe you could just talk a little bit about that.
I think I agree with you, Mike, and that's also when I started to become, when I, as an identity management professional, knew that I needed to become much more educated and have understanding of what was actually being done in India because of this push, not just by India, but by global development institutions like the World Bank, to take the Indian model and export it to other places. Then I was like, uh-oh, that architecture may not be appropriate. We need to have a deeper dialogue with more parties who are going to be affected by this architecture that's being exported. And I think the good thing that I see, having just come back from the MOSIP conference, which is an architecture designed, inspired by Aadhaar, is that there is a keen movement towards, once you've enrolled a citizen, to issuing credentials to them and having the credential sharing model be much more widespread. And that's heartening to me. Like, I'm like, okay, great. Let's encourage that more, because the phone home type architectures are inherently dangerous in their architecture.
One last thought about accessibility. So there's a certain percent of the population that's going to have smartphones, and to what extent does it make sense to move forward first with serving that constituent group, and then figuring out how to make accessible this technology to people who don't have smartphones versus saying we're not going to introduce a solution unless it's accessible to everybody?
That's a fantastic question. I think there are intermediate solutions. One is having cloud wallets that are hosted so that people can have the functionality of a wallet without having a smartphone. Now you have to have a service provider you trust. Last time I checked, a lot of us hold our monies in banks. We figured out how to build institutions that have fiduciary duties to people and act well on, in terms of how they behave. You can also do, as a country that I know of is considering, is actually giving every household a smartphone. The very lowest low-end smartphones now cost $40. A company called KaiOS makes them. It used to be Firefox OS, and that project was picked up and commercialized. So, it could be cheaper to just make sure every household, not every person, but every household has a smartphone with wallet capabilities, and then building roads to make sure they can walk to the office.
Final, Matt, I was just going to ask you for any final thoughts. We're in our last 2 minutes. Thoughts or questions, Matt?
Yeah, it just kind of brought something to mind. What do you think about knowledge-based factors for folks who don't have smartphones? So this is something that that's been on my mind. So you would take the knowledge-based factor and more or less, give them hints to be able to recall those factors, and then deterministically generate a wallet that way. Instead of giving everybody a smartphone or putting everything in the cloud, it's essentially based on many different factors that they know about themselves that are private, and nobody else knows. I mean, we're talking very, very specific. What do you think about that kind of solution? Maybe what are the pitfalls of it?
I think we need to experiment and figure stuff out. Like, I don't know. It's all about research and what works in the real world. I have concerns about KBA because, one, like, databases exist, and two, AI may impact it even more, right? So, but we gotta more research. Let's figure it out.
Or maybe a good topic to bring up at Internet Identity Workshop on April 16th. Not too late to get your tickets. With that, thank you, Kaliya, for joining today. Thank you, Matt. And congratulations, you are now the first minted Identerati. So thank you guys for joining.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay, the stream is over. A little shaky, but I think it happened.